All right, if you're joining us just now, we're very happy to have you here. We'll begin in a few minutes while we wait for everybody to arrive. Again, please feel free to share with us in the chat box where you're joining us from and what is your favorite pipeline. And for the people who just joined, I will remind you once again that the upcoming US edition of the Nextflow Summit will be held in Boston, May 21st through the 24th. And we've opened the call for abstracts, so we'd love to hear to see your submissions. All right, let's get started. Okay, thank you all for joining our webinar about streamlining your Nextflow pipeline development with NF Core templates. My name is Geraldine van der Hoera. I'm Seqera's lead developer advocate, and I'm joined today by my colleague and fellow developer advocate, Chris Hackart. Hi, Chris. Let's get started without further ado. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First, please submit all of your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll go over those at the end. We'll have a poll just before the live Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So please participate in the poll. We look forward to your answers. And lastly, we will be sharing the recording of the webinar by email once it's completed. All right. So to get us started, let me give you a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a short presentation about Seqera and Nextflow to give you a bit of more context, also about what Nextflow is and what NF Core is. And then we'll dive into today's topic of NF Core templates and how you can use them effectively in your own work. And this is going to be especially exciting today because Chris is going to do a live demo showing you in loving detail how to use NF Core templates in your own work. All right, so let's begin with a few words about Seqera and Nextflow. Now, if you're not familiar with Seqera, basically we're the company that makes Nextflow. Evan and Paolo created Nextflow a decade ago at a time when bioinformatics ecosystem was really just starting to take off, and there weren't yet any really robust workflow management systems that people could just adopt and run out of the box. It was a lot of bespoke in-house systems and a bit of a jungle. And so Nextflow was the first major piece, I would say, that they developed and that Seqera was founded on. And since then, we've stayed ahead of the curve, I would say, by continuing to improve Nextflow, but also adding some other critical pieces to the puzzle, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to say throughout that evolution, Seqera has maintained a core commitment to open source values and practices, which is demonstrated through the open source products like Nextflow, as well as support for key community efforts like NF Core, which is the focus of our webinar today. So let's talk a little bit more about what Seqera makes. So I've talked a little bit about how Nextflow itself has evolved and has gained some siblings in terms of products that are made by Seqera. And the current endpoint of that evolutionary process is Seqera Platform, which is a modern biotech stack for managing and analyzing data at scale. I'm not going to go into the full details on this because I know you're very keen to learn about NF Core templates. But if you're interested in learning more about the platform, you can contact us after the webinar to request a demo. For now, I want to point out the 4 core components here, which are Nextflow, MultiQC, Fusion, and Wave, which are some of the key components in the platform, but which are open source, and you can use them separately, independently of Seqera platform. And of course, today we're here to talk specifically about Nextflow and its relation to NF Core. So, For context, let's recap briefly what is Nextflow and what it's meant for. What problem is it supposed to solve? And the reason we're here, of course, is that computational pipelines can be quite complex. This is an example of a bioinformatics pipeline that's, well, not necessarily the most complex by a long shot. I think that honor is held by Sarek, probably. But this is complex enough that you wouldn't want to write something like this in Bash or something similar. And so Nextflow is specifically designed to make writing and running modern pipelines like this as straightforward as possible, providing critical features like reproducibility and portability, while also providing important features like flexibility, scalability, and power. Okay. And so that's essentially what Nextflow is for in terms of enabling your work. Now, in practice, Nextflow is actually two things, right? Well, three: a language, a runtime, and a community. So let's start with the pipelining language. Nextflow is the language that you actually write the pipeline code in, and it's also the application that interprets the code and turns that into actionable instructions that can be dispatched for execution. At the level of the workflow language, it allows you to use any command line tools that you might normally want to run from within a shell, but also write code in any language. So if you have analysis code that you've written, you can encapsulate that within your Nextflow pipeline. So you have a lot of flexibility. You can orchestrate tasks, so the various steps of your pipeline, using data flow programming. So you set up your pipeline so that the data flows through the various steps in the way that makes sense for your analysis. You can define software dependencies via containers, which allows you to have very tight control over the versions and the environments that the tools are going to be executed in. And there's built-in integration for version control using Git, so that you can have tight control at every step. In addition, at the level of the runtime, the system is set up so that you can use pretty much any of the major infrastructure options that you might want for the task orchestration and execution. So whether you're working with one of the major clouds like AWS, or a different platform, maybe your institutional HPC, Nextflow will allow you to connect to that and execute your pipelines on whatever platform you're already using. And if you want to use multiple platforms, you can have a hybrid setup so that you can use the right infrastructure for the right workload. So that's from a technical point of view, what's at a very high level, what Nextflow enables you to do. I mentioned it's also a community of people who are, very dynamic and highly engaged. And that includes a wide range of people. You have engineers who are contributing to the language developments, but also scientists and researchers who write and use the pipelines. So it's a very active community in itself. And within that, there's kind of nestled at the heart of that community, there's a core project that is called, of course, NF-Core. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, NF-Core was a project that was started by Phil Eels, and colleagues back when he was at SciLife Lab Institute in Sweden. The core idea, so to speak, is to create community-curated pipelines with an emphasis on processes of cooperation, scientific collaboration, and best practices, so that researchers could have pipelines that they could share widely to collaborate, to reduce duplication of effort, and increase the comparability of the results that people were getting out of their analysis. Which is already a very cool idea in itself. And I would say it's really been validated by the huge amount of interest in adoption of the project since its inception. I also add that in my view, one powerful and rather unusual aspect of the project is that it explicitly takes into account the needs of three traditionally very different groups. There's the developers of pipelines themselves. Um, there's also the end users, the people, the large number of researchers who mainly just want to be able to use an existing pipeline out of the box, maybe with some customizations. But also facilities like hospital labs who have needs that go beyond the pure research requirements in terms of, for example, change control, reporting, quality assurance, and so forth. And so the NF Core project actually, caters to those three very different constituencies, and that's pretty unusual for this kind of open source volunteer-driven project. So having set that context, let's talk about what's actually in the box. Um, this is a very high level overview of the kinds of resources that NF Core provides. I would say there's kind of two types, right? At the first row, you have pipelines, sub-workflows, modules. That's all essentially pipeline code. So there's full pipelines that are end-to-end, but there's also sub-workflows because the NF Core pipelines are structured in such a way that they're as modular as possible. So there's sub-workflows that you can reuse in various pipelines. Again, with the idea of reducing duplication of effort, reducing maintenance burden, things like that. And then there's modules, and a large number of modules, where a module typically is a component that encapsulate one process, one task within the pipeline. So typically a command line tool like your favorite genome aligner or something like that is a tool that would be encapsulated in a module. And then one person sets that up one time, and then everybody can just use that module when they want to use that tool in their Nextflow pipeline. So those are code assets that are just that are there to be used and reused. And then there's a layer of tooling. So on the second row, there's kind of examples of tooling that are provided as part of NF Core for doing things like linting, for validating inputs, and various tooling around deployment and development practices. As part of all that, of course, we have the thing we want to talk about today, which is the NF Core pipeline templates, which is listed as part of the pipelines. The thing to understand here is that all NF Core pipelines are built based on the same base template. And that has a number of advantages, particularly in a context where you have, like this, a set of composable resources. Because once you have a template, you can cut down on the amount of code that you have to write yourself. You can assemble things using that template. It has all sorts of advantages. I want to highlight for now one particular advantage, which is that this really helps you compose your pipeline and reuse or customize as much as you need. If you think about how an NF Core pipeline is structured, you have kind of three different layers. At the lowest level, you have the modules describing the individual processes. Modules will be grouped into sub-workflows, workflows or sub-workflows. And then that is wrapped in the pipeline overall, which adds, parameters and resource request configurations that are at the level of the end-to-end pipeline. And you can, as a end user of the project resources, you can go in and just use that end-to-end pipeline out of the box, or if you like. But you can also choose to use the same core logic, same workflow code, same modules, but customize how that gets wrapped into an end-to-end pipeline with maybe different parameters, input channels, and so on. You also have the flexibility to go further and to change the internal plumbing within the pipeline. You can swap sub workflows, you can change things around, you can swap certain modules, or you can go all the way and really just change it all, and bring in your own modules and sub workflows. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of doing kind of a mix and match of components. And that is in part strongly enabled by this use of common templates. Now, that's what Chris is going to show you next, is basically how you can use this concept of the base templates to take advantage of the composability of NF Core pipelines, and on top of that, gain a number of additional advantages in terms of development process. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Chris, who is going to demo this.
Thanks, Geraldine. Just taking over the screen share now. Great, so hopefully everyone can see that. It is really nice to be here talking about this. When I was first learning Nextflow, the template was something that really drew me to the NF Core community. I remember using the template, using the NF Core tooling to help me create this template, and having a really mind-blowing experience using this out of the box for the first time. And I hope that today I'll be able to share that excitement with you as well. This is also quite exciting as well. Some of you may be aware that there is a brand new version of the NF Core tooling. So the tooling is updated quite regularly. And just recently, so recently that it was yesterday, the 2.13 was released. As a part of this, there's actually some updates to the template as well. So for those of you that are already familiar with the template, or have seen the template before, or looked around some of the repositories for NF Core, things will look a little bit different today. To recap a point that Geraldine made, NF Core is a community effort to collect this curated set of analysis pipelines built using Nextflow. And as a part of this, there is a set of tools that really help streamline the use and development of these pipelines. There are two main sort of categories for this tooling. The first is this sort of tooling for users. So here I've just typed in NF Core, and you can see up here that we've got these commands for users, functions like list launch, create params files. Of course, all of these tools for users go really hand in hand with tools for developers. However, we will be looking at the tools for developers in focus today. So to start things off, what I want to show you is this NF Core create command. So this is really the basis for how you can create a template pipeline, a out-of-the-box pipeline using the template from NF Core. So here I've just typed in NF Core create, and I've hit enter, and it's going to start prompting me for asking me some questions that will help sort of design this template for me. So the first is, what do I want to call my pipeline using this template? I'm going to say it is called templates webinar. And I'm going to hit enter. I can give it a description. This is my demo pipeline. I can give the author. And now this new prompt is asking me if I want to customize the template. This is relatively new functionality. It's kind of cool functionality because it's kind of the base for the direction of the template and some of the tooling from NF Core, is that we want to give you as developers choices about what parts of the template you want to use. We realize that if you're from, outside of life sciences, for example, you might not want to have all of the code in there for iGenomes, which is the reference database that is, or used to be automatically linked into the template. So we're trying to give you back a little bit of power when you're sort of designing these templates or using these templates out of the box. So I'm going to click yes. I'm going to give it a different prefix, and I'm going to turn off some of these features that I don't want in my pipeline that I'm developing, and just hit enter. So you can see over to the left here, we have already created this template. It's created a lot of files and folders, and also down here in the terminal is suggested some code that I might want to use to submit this to a repo on GitHub. I've actually already created a repo for this. So over here, you can see this is just a public repo that I've already created. I've just called it templates webinar. The reason I've done this is just to save a little bit of time me recreating this. Get back to my VS Code. There we are. So what I'm going to do is just move into this folder, this new sort of template that I've created. Then I'm going to use this line of code here, which is going to push this code to the remote, to this repo that I've created. And then finally, I'm just going to, push it all here. So this is the same code that has suggested. I've just sort of copied and pasted it, sort of pre-filled out to save myself a little bit of time. One thing you'll notice here is actually created 3 separate branches. This is quite important, especially because of this template branch. And the template branch is something I will come back to. For now, all you really need to know is that this is important for syncing templates so that as new versions of the template are sort of shared, made available by the NF Core developers, this template branch is one of the features that allows us to merge those in. Again, I will come back to this. The template itself can be quite overwhelming when you first see it. I mean, there's a lot of different files and folders all the way through this folder that I've just created. The template is designed to help get you started with the pipeline and help you to write good code. Unfortunately, you don't need to understand every file and folder to get started. It's also quite unlikely that you'll need to modify every file and folder as you develop your pipeline, but it's nice to have these here to start off with, and then it's up to you if you want to sort of align with these or remove them or customize them to best suit your needs. Because there is a lot going on here, I'm just going to try to focus on a few things which are quite important for the template and sort of behind some of the features that I want to show you today. So the first is the name and version of the pipeline. So on the right here, as an example, you can see that inside the workflows folder, we have this templates webinar. This is a name that I gave to the pipeline. This is used to identify the pipeline. It's actually spread out in a number of different places throughout the template. The important thing here is that this is kind of given this pipeline identity. It's been used to help me push this to Git. Again, naming a workflow might not seem that significant, but as you have different sort of versions, different pipelines are developed at any one time, it's nice to have this sort of interspace throughout the template without you having to go through and type in, my first pipeline everywhere. The second is that the pipeline comes with Git and configuration files that help you manage your pipeline development with GitHub and continuous integration testing. So up here, for example, we have this GitHub folder. Inside this, we already have a number of different workflows. I'm pointing this out now because this does come into play when you are submitting your code to Git. You can choose to have this, have your pipeline go through continuous integration testing so that every time you make a change, you can make it execute a series of checks and tests to make sure that you haven't introduced any sort of breaking changes and that all of your code fits a particular format, which is a really nice way to code, meaning that as you are developing, you're not sort of getting too crazy or diverging from your set path at any one point. Third is that the template comes with a set of linting tests that are designed to help you write good code. Most of these are sort of applied using this NF Core lint functionality, something that I will show you shortly. But for now, I just wanted to show you that these are sort of stored in this nfcore.yaml file just sitting here. So these are a bunch of checks that can be sort of executed and used either through the workflows and the continuous integration or using the NF Core linting test. The fourth is that this template comes with a schema. So the schema is really useful for validation and documentation. This is a really important feature because it allows you to write good code and help others run your code as well. Also help you understand it. So down here in this Nextflow schema file, we have this big JSON file. All the way down here, we already have some different schema information included about different parameters and features of the pipeline. All this has been written here for you automatically. And I'll show you some tooling about how you can edit this in a nice GUI so that you don't have to touch this file by hand. Finally, as Geraldine has already mentioned, all of the NF Core pipelines do come in this sort of standardized format. So no matter what NF Core pipeline you look at, even if you're developing your own or sort of getting ideas from something that has been submitted to the NF Core repository, you can expect to find the same things in the same places, which of course is really helpful. It gives you that sense of familiarity as you develop. Of course, as I mentioned, this is a new set of tooling and a new template. For anyone that is familiar with the template already, you might have noticed that we're missing the lib directory. For those that weren't familiar with the lib directory used to contain a lot of sort of Groovy code that was used to help sort of manage the pipeline and some of these features that I've already mentioned. What's actually happened is that the code from this has been moved into sub-workflows inside the sub-workflows folder here. They've all been given this sort of prefix utils, and as a part of these files, all of the same tests and code is in here. It's just been moved out to make it a little bit easier to find, a little bit more testable, a little bit more modular, and this is really paving a way for a more fixable template moving forward. Again, something I'll come back to right at the end as we look at the sort of roadmap ahead for the template and the tooling. So moving on, this is a template, but it is also a working pipeline straight out of the box. So this pipeline has already come with a test config. So this is one of the configuration files that can be applied to a pipeline. As a part of this is actually some reference data, which is stored on GitHub. And we can use this when executing the pipeline using some profiles to work and run a small test data set to see if we've introduced any breaking changes to the pipeline at any point. So here, I'll just clear this. I'm going to use the Nextflow. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to move back one directory. So I'm just going to type in Nextflow run, and then this is the template I've just created in my local directory. I'm going to add a couple of profiles, the first being this test profile, the config I just flashed up before, as well as Docker. So I have Docker running in the background here, and because each module in this pipeline has come with a container, so we specified a container in the directive. It means that this pipeline will go away, pull these from a public registry, and execute them on my system using that containerized version of the software. Finally, I just need to add an output directory, which I'm just going to call results, and I'm going to hit execute. So this might take 1 to 3 minutes, depending on how quickly Docker downloads these images for me. And while it's running, I can explain the importance of the test profile. So there's a lot of test data that's actually already available as a part of the NF Core repository, much like we have the pipelines and the different components, so modules and sub-workflows. There's a repository there that has a lot of test data which you can access as developers and sort of leverage when you're developing your own test profiles. Here, we're just using the test profile that was out of the box. But ultimately, you can sort of just plug this into pretty much most data types are available now. So it's a really powerful way to use it. There's also the profile, which I've used here for Docker. There's different profiles for different sort of software managers. So if you're going to use Docker, Singularity, Conda, there's a few others. You can just add this as a profile to your template. These are all included as a part of the template configuration, meaning that you can just sort of quickly jump between different software managers, I guess, by quickly just adding a different profile. Another highlight of the test data is that the same test data is actually used for CI testing. So whenever you submit a pull request, add some more code to your GitHub repository, that can trigger tests, which will give you a pass or fail, depending on if this pipeline runs successfully. Which is a really useful thing as a part of the NF Core sort of code base. So whenever we're trying to sort of submit or update pipelines, there's checks in place that need to pass before the code can be sort of merged, something that you could implement in your own development processes as well. So this is taking a wee while to run, so I might just kill this process. You might just have to believe me that this does in fact work. But over here, this has started to populate in this results folder over to the left. So moving on, I want to show you how quick and easy it is to add other components to this pipeline. So the template is designed to be kind of plug and play with the components that are shared on the NF Core repo. As I said, there's modules and sub-workflows, and the NF Core tooling helps facilitate this again. So again, we have these tools for developers, and we have this modules command. So when we type in NF Core modules, we have lots of options to both create and then install modules from the NF Core repository. What I'm going to do is install a module called fastp. So I'm going to go NF Core modules install. What this is doing is it is checking, I'm in the wrong repo, sorry about that. What this is doing is it's going to be checking the NF Core repository, seeing what's available, and then sort of helping me install this as well. So I'm just going to go fastp and hit enter. This is now installing this into my repository. So over here to the left, you can see that this has actually already been installed in this repository. It's just put this straight into my pipeline into the template for me. It's also suggested some code that I can use to incorporate this into my pipeline. Jumping back to the workflow folder, the file where, the workflow file, which is kind of the home base for the pipeline, where the sort of different sub-workflows and modules are incorporated. I can include this line up the top here, and I'm just going to space it out because I like my code being nice and neat. And then down here, I can include some code for this particular module as well. So going to the NF Core website, there's already some documentation here about what this module looks like, what the different parts of the module are, so the different files that you're expecting to have as inputs and outputs. Jumping back to the module itself, I can also open up the code here in this main.nf file and see what it's expecting as the inputs. To keep things nice and lean, again, just because I was a little bit worried about time, what I'm going to do is just copy and paste in some code that I already prepared earlier. So what this is doing here is it's calling the fastp module that I've included up here on line 8. Down here on lines 40 through 48, I've included the module, and I've given it the 4 inputs that it was expecting. Again, I've done this because of prior knowledge and I knew what to expect, but one of the outputs out here, so the same that's being fed into the fastqc, I'm feeding it in here as a first element, as well as some other channels being filled up with a couple of booleans and an empty vector at the moment. Okay, so I'm just going to save that. You can see that this was quite quick and easy for me to do, partly because of prior knowledge. I knew what I was looking for, but there are over 1,000 different modules that you can incorporate into a pipeline at any time. One of the cool things about the template, and something that's happened in the background as I have been doing this as well, is that we have this other file to the left here called modules.json. And what this is doing is it's tracking the modules that I've incorporated from NF Core. You can see here that we've sort of specified the NF Core modules get repository, but you don't actually have to use the NF Core repository. You and your group or your institute or whoever it might be, you can use private repositories as well. So instead of installing from NF Core, you could have your own private sort of set of modules as well that you might want to use. The idea here is that we don't want to, necessarily tell you what you should be doing. You might sort of see some features about this that you want to apply to your own work, but you don't want to align with NF Core in its whole. You have the power to make these choices. You can really pick and choose about what parts of the template and the tooling you want to align with. So I'm just going to save that. I'm going to move back one repo. And I'm just going to try and execute this pipeline again. Hopefully it will be a little bit smoother. And we're just going to hit resume. We're trying to speed that up a little bit as well. So you can see here that this is launching. We now have this fastp module being incorporated into the pipeline as well. Okay, so that's started to run, which is great news. So as your pipelines evolve, naturally it's tempting to sort of move away from the template. There are lots of different considerations that you might have about different features or things that you want to do with your pipeline. And that's okay. But also we want to sort of help you maintain good practices as you do this sort of moving forward. So as a part of this, I just want to show you this NF Core linked functionality. And what this will do is it'll check your pipeline. Oh, in the wrong repo. What this will do is sort of run checks using some of those NF Core config, that NF Core YAML file rather that I showed you earlier. So again, what this is doing is checking your pipeline. It's looking at different things. So there are options here for warnings versus things that will cause your pipeline to fail, depending on what you're interested in and are trying to do. Again, you can sort of turn all of this on and off as well. You might find that there are lots of features of NF Core that you want to align with, but it's not quite what you want. So an example of this, very arbitrarily, could be that you just want to change one of these modules, at least arbitrary. So I've just added an S on the end of that emit statement there in the process. And if I was to lint this again, it will actually give me a failed test. So now we have this one test that's failing. The tooling is helping me sort of track this. It's comparing what I have versus this modules.json file, and it's told me that the local copy of the module does not match the remote. Fortunately, NFCore also has some tooling to sort of help you sort of manage this. In this case, we're going to use the NFCore patch function. And what this will do is it'll go away, it'll look at these differences. I'm going to use fastp, and I'm just going to sort of patch this module. And what's actually happened here is it's come up with a diff file, which is telling me the difference between the remote and my local version. So this is really great. It means that I don't have to diverge away from NFCore. This diff file will help manage any changes. So if the module is updated on the remote and not locally, this will sort of help manage those differences. The next thing I wanted to show you is this NFCore schema functionality. So NFCore schema is an important part of the tooling as well. So the options here is to sort of build and lint and validate the schema file, this file that helps document and also check what you're doing with your pipeline. Before we do that though, what I will do is just quickly modify the pipeline to show you kind of what this looks like. So here, this is the fastp module I've just included. What I'm actually going to do though is just wrap a parameter around this. So this is a new parameter that I'm adding into the pipeline. And what this will do is add some functionality that would allow me to skip this step. So I'm just going to add this in here, and also over here in the nextflow.config file, I'm just going to add another option, which is just going to be skip with skip false. So this is now a new parameter for my pipeline. If I was to update the schema, I don't want to go and manually sort of edit that big JSON file. I can use this build functionality. So I'm just going to go NFCore build. What this will do is, it's NFCore schema build. What this will do is just open up, or give me the option to open up a nice GUI. And what this is going to do is going to prompt me to help incorporate this parameter into my schema file. I'm just going to hit yes there. And it's going to give me the option to open this nice GUI. So what I will do there is just try and open this for you all to see. So this is a schema file here. It's opened up in this nice GUI interface that you can already see. It's got this big JSON file down the bottom already, and it's already started to incorporate the information that I've added into the pipeline. Here, I'm not going to go too crazy sort of annotating this for now. But you can see how quick and easy this was to incorporate. All I have to do is click finish, and that has now been added back into my pipeline. So I can jump back to the VS Code browser here. My schema file has actually been updated, and now if I was to use this NFCore lint test again, it will in fact pass. Very quickly, because I do want to show you how this kind of fits into the larger ecosystem as well. What I want to do quickly is just go git add and then git commit. That's a message added fast p. So all the files that I've edited has been updated. You can see that while I only touched a few of these different files, the NFCore tooling and the template helped manage everything else for me. There's this really cool NFCore sync functionality, and this goes back to the template that I showed you earlier. So if there were changes in the template, if the template branch had been updated as a part of the template, so you can incorporate template branches from the NFCore repository. If you just go NFCore sync, what this will do is just run a series of checks on all of this and make sure that any changes that I've made or that have been made into the template can be incorporated together. This has done all of this for me, and it's even given me the git command that I can use to merge this together. So again, this is kind of a template sort of working in sort of combination with a good developer who's going to be working in combination with these other sort of concepts such as managing your code with Git to kind of fit together to make a really cohesive developer experience. there's a lot of little things that might go unnoticed, but if you're a developer, these things are really helpful. So there's another piece of tooling called the bump version, which I can just change to 0.1. And what this will do is just go through all of my code, and anywhere that the version has been mentioned as a part of the template, I've now moved from dev to version 0.1, and now I can share this with all of my friends as well. So this is all great. I have this pipeline. I now want to sort of share it with my friends and sort of manage it as a part of a larger ecosystem. So while the platform, Seqera platform, isn't sort of the main focus of this workshop, it is quite nice just to show how quick and easy it is to plug into something like this as well. So what I'm going to do here is let's make this large screen. So what I've done here is just like logged into Seqera platform. I can quickly and easily add a pipeline. I can give it a name, webinar pipeline. 2. This is my webinar pipeline. I can give it some labels, so I can give it something like test and webinar. I already have some credentials included here, which allow me to use AWS as my compute environment. So despite developing this locally, all of the good practices I used, things like the containers that were included as part of those modules and the NFcore template, means that I can just send this straight to the cloud without having to do anything special to prepare that. I can also add in the pipeline to launch. So you can see here that I've got a few pipelines already, but what I'll do is just jump back to my Git and grab it from here. So you can see that this should be updated as well. So all the pipeline changes I've made have been pushed. Actually, I haven't pushed it. Sorry, just very quickly. This one here. So we can go git push. I need to set up the remote properly. So that should all now be updated. Okay, so I'll just quickly refresh this. Make sure we'll just jump back to this a little bit quicker to jump between. Copy this from here and jump straight into launch pipeline. And I can just enter that there. So what this is doing now is it's just talking to my Git, pulling it from this public repo. I can add in some extra sort of details here, like I want to pull it from the main branch. I'm just going to use the test profile, put that in there, add in some pipeline parameters, in which case I'm just going to be specifying the output directory as a bucket. I can just click add. And where this will go to from here is I can just start to launch this pipeline straight away. So this would just take a couple of minutes to run, but you can see this extra step that I've added in here was already here. And I can just click launch, and this will start to launch on Seqera platform, where I can sort of monitor the run over time. Okay, I think that's all we have time for in terms of this sort of live demo. So I will pass it back to Geraldine. Because we are running a little bit short on time, I do want to highlight a couple of things, though, about what is to come. The first is that a lot of the credit for this tooling, the template goes to the NFcore infrastructure team. So Phil, Julia, and Matthias, they're the sort of 3 main developers behind this template and the tooling, which is just so helpful and fantastic. Some things on the roadmap include more flexibility for the template. So I mentioned earlier that there will be some flexibility being introduced into the template design. So the idea here is that we want to strip it back even more to make it more flexible for new developers so that it isn't quite so overwhelming and that you don't have to turn on all these different features at once. It's trying to give more power back to the developer so you can make the decisions and sort of apply the template in a way that's important to you. The schema is also being extended, and there's some options there that are going to be added in for a configuration builder that will help you sort of deploy these pipelines in your own environment as well. If you want to track these projects, NFcore is very transparent and open. You can sort of find these issues on GitHub, see how they're progressing, chat with the developers, and sort of contribute as well if that's something you're interested in. However, with that, I will pass it back over to Geraldine, who is going to take a quick poll.
Indeed, yes. Thank you, Chris, for that awesome demo. Everything worked pretty much. That's pretty cool for a long demo like that. It was really cool to see it in action. Um, yes, please, everyone. You should have a little poll window popping up on your computer. Please answer. It's very short. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Um, and during that time, we are going to review the questions. Feel free to keep adding your questions to the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes to answer your questions, so go nuts. And all right. So please finish up if you haven't quite finished the poll yet, but we are going to move on to discuss the live Q&A. Wait. Oh, yes. Well, we do want to we'll talk about this in a moment, I think. Um, oh, yes. No, sorry. I do want to tell you about the what happens next before we get to the live Q&A. My mistake there. If you were interested by anything that you saw today, or I'm sure there were many things that will have stimulated your interests, please feel free to request one-on-one demo if you're interested in seeing more about Seqera platform and the products in general. In any case, please make a plan to join the next Nextflow Summit. The Nextflow Summit in Boston will be happening in May of this year, and we'll have another one in Barcelona in October. We're trying to have a geographically accessible option for as many people as possible. So Boston in May, the weather will be much nicer than it is now. And we are very much looking forward to your abstract submissions. The call for abstracts is open right now. So please come join us and talk about your favorite pipelines and the work you do with Nextflow. Now, with that being said, let's look at your questions. Live Q&A. So we have a number of questions already. First, kicking us off with a very technical question is Christopher Nelson, who asks, how tall is Tall Phil? That's a very good question. I think he's gigantic. He's like 6 foot or something. Do you want it in centimeters? I don't know, 2 meters? What do you think, Chris? You're tall too, so
Yeah, I'm actually the same height as Phil.
there you
I think
go.
there's about a centimeter between us, so it's about 193, 6'4". So
There you go.
we'll get the
I'm
important questions out of the way.
I'm 1 meter 68, 5'7", and I met these two guys in person. I was like, ouch, my neck. Um, anyway, moving on to a slightly more serious question. Martin Wollstonecroft asks, could you provide a short summary of how a compute facility might use various levels of Nextflow config files to simplify the setup experience for the end users? I have some quite inexperienced users. I'm very sympathetic. I'm guessing that the answer is going to be something along institutional profiles, right? Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, so absolutely. Nextflow has about 7 different levels of configuration, which of course can be quite overwhelming, especially for inexperienced users. There are lots of ways that you can kind of bury some of these config files on your home profile or in, the work directory as sort of two polar examples. But you can incorporate these configurations in a way that they kind of stack and there's an order of priority. But you, as an admin or a teacher, you can actually sort of incorporate some sort of things behind the scenes that might really sort of benefit these inexperienced users and sort of provide some guardrails that stop them from sort of submitting anything too crazy to your cluster or anything like that. So the nextflow.config is the obvious sort of option for things that is pipeline specific, but you can also have things in your home directory as well as add it as custom configuration files at the time of execution that can help modulate this as well.
All right, thank you. Now, Luke Paul Buttigieg asks, does NF core linting suggest a standard way of writing Nextflow code, sort of like a Python formatter like Black or linter like pilot, or is it more tailored to ensuring the Nextflow code matches the requirements of submitting code to NF Core?
Yeah, great question. So things like Black and Prettier are really there just to help with some of the more standardized Python formatting. If you have like Python code in your bin directory, all your readmes can get sort of corrected by Prettier. These are quite sort of arbitrary cosmetic things. In terms of having code that kind of helps you structure your NF core, not NF core, your Nextflow code rather, watch this space. So Ben and Paolo and some of the other developers are kind of working on some functionality as a part of Nextflow to kind of help structure the code and provide a preferred format moving forward. At the moment, there isn't really anything in this space. As a part of the template and the module structure and things like that, we do have recommendations, but nothing to really enforce that at this time.
Awesome, thank you. Can we, Ife1 asks, can we add and execute pipelines by command rather than through the GUI? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry, so everything I was doing there was on the command line. You don't have to sort of move this across to the GUI if you don't want to. You can be very happy running and executing your pipelines on the command line. I think it's a little bit easier through a GUI, but the command line is quite functional. It just takes a little bit longer to learn where these things are and be able to find them in that sort of large template as well, depending on what you're trying to do.
And it tends to be a bit of a personal preference for people, right? I found that, and also sometimes I often find that the original developers will run a lot of things through the command line, but then we'll collaborate with end users, biologists, or so on, and we'll set up the pipeline for them in the GUI, and then the folks can go and use the pipelines from the GUI side without having to worry about kind of the command line, and that can be a nice complementary approach when you have people from different backgrounds collaborating on the same stuff. But yeah, it's designed to enable you to work the way you prefer to work, really. All right. Deepak Puduval asks, do you have any options to port SnakeMake or Bash pipelines to NF Core?
Not directly. In saying that, though, I think there's a lot of the code that you potentially want to write has already been submitted to the NF Core repository. So the modules and sub workflows, as I showed earlier, you can just sort of use this tooling to help you incorporate this into your pipeline already. So it might not be as big a task as you think, sort of moving that pipeline across, because there's large blocks of code that have already been written for you.
Yeah, it tends to depend like how niche your original pipeline is, because if it's something that is commonly done, yeah, there's probably already something that does it, and it's a matter of customizing it. If you're doing something incredibly niche and specific, then you might have to do it yourself. There's certain things I have seen people just encapsulate something that's in Bash that's fairly short, just make that one process within a pipeline. But sometimes it is worth taking a little bit of time to rewrite it, and you'll find that the maintainability and the portability will be increased on the long run. Well, Deepak, actually, that's a fair question. How about the support, follow-up question? How about the support for tools in GitHub that are old or do not have regular updates? How would you support version differences of base programs such as R or Python?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a fantastic question, actually. So what you can do with Nextflow, you can use things called directives to include containers or container environments from sort of any version. So if it's existed before and it's available on a public repository, as an example, your private repository, you can include this in your pipeline and you don't really need to think about this again. So even if there are newer versions, you want to stick with the older one, you can just sort of stay with that version and then not update. For different versions of things like R and Python, this might be a situation where you're trying to sort of, use R in combination with a number of different libraries. Same with Python. You can create mul containers through something like biocon to bioconductor sort of situation. There's also options through Wave, which is kind of, it allows you to kind of build these containers on the fly. And again, you can choose the versions that you want to incorporate in this. So there's a huge amount of flexibility and options that are available. Importantly, all of them lead to better reproducibility and allow you to sort of pin these versions going forward.
One more, I think. Albert Palea asks, I understand that the different profiles are found in all the configs, test, Docker, AWS, etc. But how is handled the priority of all the config files? And I will say, because I recently learned this, there's an order of precedence. Basically, there are some rules that determine depending if you have the same thing that's specified at different levels of configuration, there's some specific rules that dictate which one is actually going to be used, and that's in the documentation. But yeah, there's a sane system for managing that. Yeah. I think, do we have we don't really have a time for any more questions, I think. We probably have to wrap up. We will answer any remaining questions. Feel free to put them on Slack or in the community forum, and we'd be happy to answer them, because we're running out of time and we gotta wrap up, which is a good problem to have. So we are coming to the end of today's webinar. We hope it was useful for all of you, even if we weren't able to tackle all of the excellent questions we got. Again, you can join us on the Nextflow Slack, or the NF Core Slack, or the Seqera community forum, and we're happy to continue the discussion there. So thank you all for joining today. We'll share the recording over email in the coming days. And thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.